Telltale. I'm Emily, and if you couldn't figure out by my outfit what we were going to be talking about today, I'm about to tell you. 101 Dalmatians by Dottie Smith. Now, Dottie Smith, interesting character. She actually was a playwright. She wrote more plays than she did novels. However, her most famous is, of course, the 101 Dalmatians book. She had several aliases. Dottie Smith is not actually her real name. Her real name is Dorothy Gladys. She also went by Charles Henry Percy for several of the scripts she wrote, as well as C.L. Anthony. So if you know anything written by those two characters in plays or television or anything, that's actually her. She lived, of course, during a time where women were not necessarily seen as very serious writers, so especially except for children's books, I should say. So she kind of grew up with that struggle. She had a pretty interesting life. Her biography is called Look Back with Love. It was written in 1974, and it wasn't her autobiography, actually. And basically, she was born in 1896 and she died in 1990. She had been raised in a multi-generational home because when she was like 2 or 3 years old, her father passed away and her mother moved in back with her grandparents, aunts, and uncles, all of them living in the same roof, under the same roof. So she was kind of raised multi-generationally. You can kind of see that a little bit with how this particular story is set up, which I think is really interesting, that there is this like multi-generational living space. Not necessarily that it's all the same family, but it's kind of considered that way. So I'm going to dive right into it. 101 Dalmatians. I actually picked this particular book, one, because I love, let me see if I could get it. Which way am I going here? I love the way Cruella is portrayed in this. Also, it is an illustrated edition. This one is by, I think it's Penguin? No, Puffin Books. Puffin Books is the one who did this one. And there's just some really great illustrations in here that are very, there's Cruella. The likeness is uncanny, isn't it? I nailed it, I think. Anyway, but there's just some really great illustrations in here. I think it's a super fun book. I really enjoyed it as a piece of children's work. Of course, it does deviate a little bit from the films that we are familiar with from Disney. He did make they made several adaptations, the first being the animated one. And I'm actually going to do a little bit of compare and contrast against that one, just because one, that was the one I was raised on when I grew up. Even after the live action one came out later, I really was not as partial to it as I was the animated series. I actually didn't know 101 Dalmatians was based off a book until I was in about college and we had discussed it in children's literature class, just by mentioning, like, we didn't study it or anything like that, but it was mentioned in my children's literature class, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of vaguely remember that being, in the intro credits. I was really excited when one of my friends, after I had mentioned I'd seen the movie Cruella and really enjoyed it, said, why don't you read the original books and do dress up as Cruella? And I'm like, heck yeah, I'm gonna. So anyway, I'm gonna give you the synopsis real quick. 101 Dalmatians. The Dearleys, darlings? The darlings. No, it is the Dearleys. The Dearleys Dalmatians are Pongo and Mrs. You'll see that Mrs. is not Perdita. In fact, Perdita actually is a character, but comes in later. So they end up getting married and they have a lovely time with their pets, who are the Dearleys. And they really, really, really just have this beautiful life. Mr. Dearly is a really well-known accountant who helps solve the nation's debt problems in Britain. And they are extremely wealthy and live very nearby an old schoolmate of Mrs. Dearly, Cruella de Vil. So one day they happen to bump into her while they're walking the dogs, and they get invited to dinner, and they're just like, oh boy, like, I really find this woman terrifying. Like, she did not have a good reputation in school and all this stuff. Like, she drank ink and got expelled one time for that, and like, so, but they figured, like, no, let's not be discourteous. Let's go ahead and show up and see how the dinner goes. They arrive. Everything tastes like pepper. Cruella keeps making mentionings of how their dogs are so beautiful and would make great coats. She has a Persian cat who is really just hates her, and she hates the cat, and she mistreats the cat a lot. And her husband is a furrer, so he makes fur coats and apparel items. And he's just a spineless, kind of mediocre guy. So, like, first off, there's several differences between the movie and this book. The Darlings, or Dearlys, why do I keep calling them Darlings? I think it's because I'm mixing it up with Lady and the Tramp. The Dearlys are really wealthy. Like, they live in Regency Park. It's a really ritzy neighborhood. They live really close to Cruella and her husband, who are also extremely wealthy people because he has very expensive items and furs and stuff that he sells. And, you know, Cruella just kind of came from this lineage of old money. So she's kind of just always been that way. She's always had wealth and things like that. So they live in this ritzy neighborhood. Unlike in the movie, they're dirt poor and can hardly afford to take care of themselves. And Cruella's the one who's rich and also single, does not actually have a husband. So it kind of starts there. And as we kind of go through the story, Cruella finds out that the dogs are pregnant, and she keeps trying to steal the pup, or like keeps mentioning like, oh, I should know when the puppies are being born and all this stuff, kind of hinting at, you know, she wants to see them, and it's a little weird. So the two nannies who live in the house with the Dearlys, Nanny Cook and Nanny Butler, who are the cook and the butler, and that is actually their last names, they just kind of are brushing off every time she comes to visit. They're kind of just trying to conduct their own lives, figure things out, you know, do the things that they're supposed to do. And then one day, Cruella comes in looking for Mrs. Dearly, and she distracts one of the nannies, and then after she very quickly and abruptly leaves, and they see a black van pulling away and the puppies are gone. So, of course, Pongo and Mrs. are really upset, as is Perdita, who enters the story as a nurse for Mrs. Pongo, because Mrs. Pongo had 15 puppies and only has 8 nipples to feed her puppies. So one night when Mrs. Dearly was looking for a nurse dog or some dog that they could borrow that just had puppies to help feed these other puppies and be willing to like raise them all together, make sure they're one big happy family, on her way to back home after, you know, having no success, she finds a beautiful liver spotted Dalmatian, which is a brown spotted Dalmatian, in the road, who is pregnant. And Pongo and Mrs. find out later that her puppies were bought and taken away. She doesn't know where. Her husband had left her ages ago because his pets took him away. His pets took him away. His owners took him away. So she's just kind of high and dry and left alone, but still has milk to give. So she's their nurse. So they leave Perdita with the family and say, hey, we're going to go find our puppies. Can you just, you know, love on our family until we're back? So Perdita takes on that responsibility of being the only Dalmatian left at the house to comfort the family. And of course, the dogs have ways of communicating with one another that the humans don't. So during this whole series with these puppies, where they're trying to find their puppies, they keep barking to what is called the Twilight Bark, which is a network of other dogs that bark at around twilight to pass on information. So as they do the Twilight Bark, all these dogs heading out into like the countryside are trying to figure out where these puppies are, and they hear back, hey, bunch of puppies are over here in Suffolk. Somebody's got to come save these guys, like they're in danger. So Pongo and Mrs. start their journey, and through this kind of like grapevine sort of underground railroad thing that these dogs conduct, they're trying to get Mrs. and Pongo safely to these puppies. And of course, eventually, there's some adventures in between, there's some drama in between, but they eventually get to their puppies, only to find out not only are there 15 puppies there, but there's 97 puppies in total. So they're trying to save the rest of these 97 puppies. They kind of get together with this other dog called the Colonel, who kind of conducts this whole thing. And when they find out that the puppies are going to be sold for fur coats, and they find out Cruella de Vil is behind it, they just go into like super like, let's break these babies out mode and just adopt them all. And they knew like, if we get all these puppies to the Dearlys, they'll never take them away from us. This is going to be our whole family. We're going to love on them. We're going to take really good care of them. So they break out the puppies. They have a whole bunch of adventures on their way back to London. And of course, the story ends a happy ending. Everybody gets home, everybody gets a home. But you'll notice something. There's Pongo and Mrs. and Perdita and 97 puppies. Do the math. That's only 100 Dalmatians. There is 101st. And I'm not going to spoil that for you because that is a really sweet part of the story where the 101st Dalmatian is introduced, and you are going to love that part of the story. It's amazing, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. So, of course, we get this typical happy ending that we like from 101 Dalmatians, where everybody gets home, everybody is embraced and loved and accepted. A lot of similar situations to the movie, especially the animated one that we're familiar with. Um, so, but there are still those differences too, that's what I appreciated about this work is that Disney didn't adapt it verbatim, which doesn't always happen. I think it's actually interesting that he didn't, because it could have easily been and had some really great fun things happen in between that happen to the dogs that make this have a lot more drama. So I think it's a really great story. One of my favorite parts was what happens at the London mansion of Cruella after the dogs arrive back into town. There's just this really interesting situation that happens at her mansion on the way back in and through London to get home that I think you guys will really enjoy. But overall, this is a really great piece of children's literature. It's very plain language, so it's plain, but not as plain as, say, like The Shadow Witch, which we had reviewed as a children's story before, as well as The Wizard of Oz. It's very imaginative. The society of dogs that, excuse me, that Dottie Smith or Dodie Smith, I don't know how to pronounce it actually, builds with this society of dogs in London and in like other areas and stuff. I think it's fascinating. I think it's really fun. I think it's kind of like this underground railroad of dogs that are trying to help Mrs. and Pongo find the lost babies, and just like how they're trying to keep them away from the humans, because now there's like all these newspaper reports and stuff that all these Dalmatians are missing because the darlings are just so sad. Dearlies. I keep saying darlings. Sorry, guys. The dearlies are just so sad that their Dalmatians are gone. Like, they really love this dog and these animals. Like, these are their babies. But it's really funny because it's all told from the perspective of the dogs. So the dogs see them as the pets, which I think is super cute. I think we see that a lot more with cats as like characters, where they think the humans are the pet and they're not, and the dogs just think they're all one big happy family and nobody owns each other. They're just part of the pack. So this is a really interesting take on that. It almost comes from a cat-like perspective. There's a lot of other animal characters that are introduced, like really good cats and things that kind of are missed in the movie. A lot of extra adventures, a lot more interesting situations and stuff, and you get a lot more of an interesting background of Cruella's history that does not exactly line up with the history that's canon in Disney from the Cruella movie. So I really felt like this piece of literature is super fun, super age appropriate for real young kids. You can read this as a bedtime story. Very similar along the lines of like The Wizard of Oz and The Shadow Witch, which we've reviewed previously. I think the language is a little more complex. How sweet and innocent Mrs. Pongo is. She's a darling dog. She's just so sweet. She's not as smart as Pongo, so she has a little bit of comedic relief that's really adorable or really funny or really sweet. And she has little adventures of her own in the midst of things, so I thought it was nice that she kind of separates the personalities of the dogs and builds these very complex but beautiful characters that are different from each other, even though they're part of the same family. And it's just so well done. Like, you love a good dog story, right? And no dogs get harmed really in the making of this story, which I think is the best part. You get an all-around happy ending. It's not like Old Yeller where the dog dies in the end. We all know. And it's not like where the red ferns grow or anything, where the dogs have these, kind of tragic situations and really like violent issues and stuff they encounter. This is just a really wholesome, great kid story. I read this, it's like what? Less than 200 pages. I read this in a day. I think over the course of 5 hours, I just cracked down and read the whole thing. Yeah, it's 184 pages. Like, you can do a chapter a night in like 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And that's a good bedtime story for kids. If you want a really nice, easy read to go along with your children. If you just appreciate children's literature in general, this is a really great classic book. So I just can't recommend it enough. I think it's a really sweet piece of literature. I really like Cruella's whole persona and the whole thing. She's actually kind of a funny character too, because like she only eats anything that tastes like pepper. So like the whole time at the dinner party, the dearlies are sitting there like, why does everything taste like pepper? Why is everything spicy? Why is she like this? So like it just reinforces a lot of this very hellish devil woman kind of persona, especially when you realize, yeah, her family's ancestral home is called Hell Hall. Legit. So, I mean, that's accurate. It's just such an interesting piece of literature, so highly recommend it. Some great things I didn't want to spoil for you. Go get it. You can find it at just about every library. Have fun, guys. It's a good read. Like, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on 101 Dalmatians. If you've read the book and seen the movies and all of the different productions of it, and if you've seen Cruella, because it's so good, go ahead and let me know what you thought and how you liked it compared to the book and vice versa. I think that's a great conversation starter, and I think it's easy to relate books to their film adaptations and do compare and contrasts. That's kind of something that my husband and I really enjoy doing, so definitely would love to hear your thoughts on all of those things. I'm Emily. I'm going to see you next time. Bye, guys.